So I'm going to talk about organisms that I think are really astonishing. I think that these organisms change the way that we understand both the living world and ourselves. And I think these organisms also teach us that you don't need a brain to be able to solve complex problems. So we'll get to that in a moment. But these organisms are fungi. I'm going to talk about how fungi make our worlds, how they change our minds, and how they shape our futures. Now, fungi are a kingdom of life. And this is as broad and busy a category as animals or plants. But fungi are a kingdom of life that has not received a kingdom's worth of attention. And this is really interesting because there are so many things about fungi that we do not know. There are so many aspects of fungal life that are mysterious. And it makes it very exciting to think about these organisms, to talk about these organisms, to study these organisms. And there's lots we don't know. There's lots that many people just don't even imagine about fungi. For instance, when we think about fungi, we normally think about mushrooms. But mushrooms are just the reproductive structures of fungi. They're a bit like the apples on an apple tree, a place where a plant produces seeds in order for it to disperse itself. And mushrooms are a place where fungi produce spores, which allow them to disperse themselves. So really, when we're talking about fungi, we're not just talking about mushrooms. Mushrooms are just a small part of fungal life. What we're talking about, for the most part, networks. Networks of branching, fusing tubular cells called mycelium, or mycelial networks. Mycelial networks can be tiny. They can be little puffs of tissue that live on a speck of house dust, or they can be some of the largest organisms in the world. One of the largest is a network in Oregon that sprawls over nearly 10 square kilometers. So there's lots of ways to be a fungus. Most of the ways to be a fungus involve, in some way, being a mycelial network. One of these networks can do astonishing things that challenge our animal imaginations. Mycelial networks can solve complex problems. If you give them little labyrinths, little mazes to navigate, they can find the shortest path between the entrance and the exit. They do this. One of the ways they do this is by when they reach a branch point. They don't have to choose to go right or to go left, like we would choose. They can just branch and take both routes. And this allows them to explore all the possible options and work out the most efficient one. So this is a kind of spatial problem solving that they are better at than us. But they do other things. Mycelial networks are regenerative, and in a remarkable way, you can take a fragment of a mycelial network and it can regenerate into an entirely new organism. It would be like taking a bit of your fingernail and making a new you. But it would be very different from being the you that you are, because the you that you are and the you that I am are very centralized. We have brains and we have hearts as centers of operation that coordinate our activity, that allow us to navigate a changing world. Fungi don't have centers of operation, but they're able to coordinate their activity in remarkable ways. They are sensing bodies. They are bathed in rich fields of sensory information, light, temperature, any number of chemicals, acidity, pressure. And they can integrate these data streams to decide on suitable courses of action, but without a special place to do so. Their coordination somehow happens everywhere at once and nowhere in particular. So these are a very strange way of life. It's a bit like a kind of alien way of life with regard to us humans. They are so other than us. It's one of the ways that they invite us to think differently about the living world. They're not subject to all the same limitations as us. They remind us of the very many ways there are to be alive. So fungal mycelium, one of the points of fungal mycelium, the reason why fungi grow into these networks is to allow them to feed. They feed by digesting their surroundings. They burrow into their surroundings, they digest them, and then they absorb the products of those digestions. So unlike animals who tend to go around in the world and find food and put it inside our bodies, fungi put their bodies inside the food. And mycelial networks are a really good way to do this because they have such a big surface area. They are maximizing their contact with their surroundings. What this means is that fungal mycelium is everywhere, but we don't normally see it because they are inside whatever they're eating. They do grow sometimes on the surface of things, which allows us to see them, but usually they're hidden from view. And this is one of the reasons why we know comparatively little about the fungal world, say, compared with animals or plants. So fungal mycelium is enormously powerful. It's a kind of living seam by which the world is woven into relation, a kind of ecological connective tissue. Because fungal networks are transforming their environments. They're forming pathways, transport networks between different organisms, between different parts of the soil, between different parts of ecosystems, through which nutrients pass, through which sugars and fats pass from plants down into the soil. These are world-making, world-changing ways of life. It's like if you imagined, I often think about how I could imagine fungal mycelium, because it's so hard to imagine, because it's so everywhere, so hidden. But I think often of the charts that children are shown in schools. You know, these big charts on the walls of the human body. You have the human body represented as a skeleton, the human body represented as a network of blood vessels, or as a network of neurons. So if you could imagine similar diagrams, similar sets of diagrams to represent the ecosystems of the planet, one of those layers would represent fungal mycelium. And you would see the mycelial networks ranging through the soil, through the bodies of animals and plants, whether alive or whether dead. You would see them in floorboards of houses. You'd see them in rubbish dumps. You'd see them in the canvases of paintings hanging in museums. Fungal mycelium is all over the place. And it's all over the place doing stuff, changing the way that chemicals and substances move around the biosphere, changing and regulating the composition of the Earth's atmosphere, making compost, building soil, creating all these various possibilities for life. Without fungi, we would certainly never have evolved. So I think of these fungal networks as a kind of a poster organism for ecological thinking. You know, they represent, on some level, the fundamental principles of ecology. Ecology is all about the relationships formed between organisms, the relationships formed between organisms and other organisms and the places in which they live. And fungi embody this because they form connective networks that link together different organisms and that connect together different places, different parts of the soil. They might connect a rotting log with another happening over here in the forest. They might connect a plant's roots with a whole other plant's roots over here. So they're a kind of embodiment of this ecological principle of relationality, of relationship. And indeed, fungi have been major players in some of the most blockbuster relationships in the history of life. Life is a story of intimate collaborations. Life is a story of organisms working together in complex ways to achieve things that organisms could not achieve by themselves. And we are all made up of relationships. We carry around more microbial cells than our own cells. All organisms are connected in this way with other organisms. Even a bacteria can have small bacteria living inside them. Larger viruses can have smaller viruses living inside them. Fungi have bacteria that live inside them, but also they have bacteria that navigate the soil using fungal networks as highways. So life is always a story of togetherness. That togetherness can take many kinds of flavor, but it's togetherness nonetheless. And so in these world-changing, world-making symbiotic relationships, fungi have played very important roles. And one of these relationships I want to talk about today, which is very close to my heart, it's what I study the most, is a relationship called a mycorrhizal relationship. It's a relationship formed between nearly all plants and fungi that live in and around the plant's roots and exist in complex trading relationships with plants. Plants supply the fungus with sugars and with fats, so a sort of energy. And the fungi supply plants with mineral nutrients like nitrogen or phosphorus that the plant is less able to acquire than the fungus. These are complex trading relationships, and at any one moment, a given fungus might be sprawled over tens of meters. It might be engaged with the millions of plant root tips, and it could be navigating these trading relationships with each one of these root tips, somehow coordinating itself over this large area, balancing the way that it's exchanging nutrients and receiving energy, depending on what's going on around it. We have no idea how they're able to do this right now. There's a lot of questions about how they can coordinate their activity, but we know that they are able to, in a way that sustains a lot of life on Earth, has changed the way that life happens. About 500 million years ago, the ancestors of plants, of land plants, had not yet moved out of the water and onto the land. Land was scorched and barren, desolate, very high levels of CO2, rocky and dusty, wild temperature fluctuations. A few extremophile microbes lived on land, but it wasn't really the site of most of life's activity. In the sea, there were 9-foot-long sea scorpions ranging the floor. There were mollusks thriving. There were coral reefs starting to form. But land was desolate and fairly empty compared with the sea and with other watery environments. And something strange happened. And that thing was that the ancestors of plants, which were algae, which are photosynthetic organisms, which float around in the water, photosynthesizing, making energy from sunlight and carbon dioxide. These algae, which lived in the water very happily for a long time, started to make a life on land. These were the ancestors of all land plants. And the way they were able to do this is by striking up a relationship with fungi. The fungi are, with their remarkable problem-solving networks, could navigate the complex labyrinths of the soil. The fungi, with their ability to digest, with their ability to eat their surroundings, were able to harvest nutrients and minerals from these soils. And by growing inside the algal cells, the algal tissues, they were able to provide these minerals to the algae in return for energy compounds, sugars and lipids that the algae were able to make in photosynthesis. And this is a very ancient pact that then started to make way for more algae to move onto the land, for the whole lineage of land plants to begin to take hold on land. And these relationships are around today in the form of mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizal fungi, these associations between plants and fungi are ancient. They've transformed the biosphere. As soon as these plants started to spread and grow larger and larger on land, all these millions of years ago, the climate changed, because the plants were pulling so much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There was a period of global cooling, which resulted from the radical transformation for the conditions of life, partly enabled by these fungal associations. So this is one example of the way that fungi can form relationships by being ingenious and flexible and collaborative. And collaboration is not something that I mean to say as some kind of utopian concept. I think of collaboration as always a blend of competition and cooperation, often in a very fluid way. It's hard to tell what's going on at any one time, and it might change from cooperative to competitive or full of conflict from moment to moment, but nonetheless collaborative, a sense of being with, of becoming with. And fungal relationships with humans are no less astonishing. Whenever humans interact with plants, which we do all the time, of course, we're interacting with fungi, whether or not we think about those fungi. There are fungi living in the leaves of plants that act like a kind of immune system for plants that defend them from disease. There are fungi that live inside the trunks, the stems of plants. There are fungi that live in the roots and around the roots, as I've said. Whenever you eat a plant or cultivate a plant, you're eating and cultivating fungal relationships. Fungi make soil. Whenever we work or depend on the soil, we are engaging with fungi and the processes that they oversee. If fungi didn't decompose wood, for example, the earth would pile kilometers deep in the bodies of unrotted trees and unrotted forests. So we live and breathe in the space that fungal decomposition leaves behind. We live in that space that decomposition creates. Fungi produce all sorts of chemicals. They're chemically ingenious, metabolic wizards that can produce all sorts of compounds which have for a very long time featured in human life as medicines. Penicillin is a modern example of a fungal compound transforming the way that we relate to health and disease. As psychedelics, psilocybin, of course, is a powerful molecule that changes the way that we think and feel and imagine. There are many fungal drugs that exist today that we don't think of as fungal drugs. Cyclosporin is a drug that enables organ transplants. It's an immunosuppressant that enables organ transplants. That's produced by a fungus. Cholesterol-lowering statins are produced by fungi. So fungi change our lives in all sorts of interesting chemical ways. Alcohol, of course, is produced by yeasts. Yeasts are fungi. No fungi, no alcohol. No fungi, no bread. And so there are all of these ways that human life has very long time been entwined with the lives of fungi. And there are very many ways that in the place of crisis and transformation that we stand in today that we can partner with fungi to help meet some of these challenges. There are all sorts of new fungal drugs that we have not yet discovered. There are ways that we can build materials with fungal mycelium that can replace plastics and damaging, polluting composites in many applications. Leather, a leather-like material as well. So this could really change the way that we think about how we build things and the kinds of things that we build. Fungi can also, with their amazing voracious appetites and their chemical wizardry, can break down complex molecules. They're doing this all the time. And there might be ways that we can partner with them to digest some of the polluting compounds that we produce in industry and through various other processes. Humans are always producing all sorts of poisonous pollution. And are there ways that we can work with fungi to join these loops, to think of waste not so much as something which once produced is always there, but rather as an opportunity for the next stage in its life? Fungal decomposition is cyclical. So much of life is cyclical. And so there are ways we can partner with fungi to digest these damaging products. There are ways that we can use fungi to deepen and expand the way we think about agriculture and forestry. Whenever we are dealing with soil, as I say, we're dealing with fungi and fungal life. So there are ways that we could think about making agriculture more regenerative and less harmful to the environment by involving fungi, by thinking about these organisms rather than not thinking about these organisms. So there are many ways we can partner with fungi to help adapt to life on a damaged planet. And so I think I'm going to leave it there, and we'll start the Q&A. But thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Now, as Merlin, you said, it is now time for questions. So it is also time for you to take the hot seat. Yes, we've got a question from this woman over here, the red top.
So my question is, how did you first find out about fungi, and what made you interested in it? Have you been interested in it ever since you were a child, or? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm the son of a biologist, so I was always encouraged to take an interest in the living world and the many lives unfolding around me. But I think what first got me interested in fungi as a child was I would take buckets of kitchen waste from the kitchen and put them on a compost heap in the garden. I would help my dad in the garden. And I started to ask how it changed from like banana peels and orange skin into the soil that we shoveled out of the compost heap several months later and put onto the flower beds. And he explained that there were organisms that we couldn't see with our naked eyes, that oversaw these transformations of stuff into different kinds of stuff. And it struck me as a superpower. It's an amazing superpower, this ability to decompose and recompose the stuff of the world. And so I became very interested in these creatures, whoever they were. I didn't really know at that point, but that's where I think a lot of my interest in this sub-visible realm of microbes and largely fungi began.
Thank you. Yes, we've got a couple questions in the front row here.
Thank you for your very fascinating lecture. I was wondering about the Ganoderma species, you know, reishi. It's native to Hungary, but what I've heard that despite having the same morphology as the Asian type, it's a different species because it's got a different DNA, so it doesn't have the same effect.
So this is something, fungi make so many problems for taxonomists. You know, taxonomists are trying to do the work of ordering and grouping the living world into organisms that are more or less closely related. But fungi are confusing because there are so many fungi, as you say, the reishi, they might look similar, but actually there are what's called cryptic species. So there are differences between mushrooms that might look quite similar. So a mushroom species that for a long time has been called one species might turn out to be 5 different species just because of their molecular characteristics. So in this case, I don't know the details. There are lots of reishi that grow. Reishis are quite a general term for a large group of fungi. So I don't know which reishi are being compared in this case, and which would be better. But if you're growing reishi in a Chinese strain of reishi in China, it will also depend what that's been grown on, you know, because fungi are eating their surroundings. So when you're thinking about what a fungus can do, it's very important to think about the context, because they are so shaped by their context. You know, a fungal network that grows in one place could be completely different looking and completely different chemically to a fungal network growing in another place, depending on its surroundings. So difficult to answer your question exactly. I'm sorry.
Deep question, thank you. And to the person sitting next to you.
My question would be that what do you think about these home growing kits or mushroom growing home kits that you can buy and you can grow mushrooms at home? And what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's great. I love growing fungi. I grow them on logs in the garden, and I sometimes grow them at home as well. And it's remarkable to see them grow. You can really almost see them grow. That's one of the amazing things about it, because mushrooms, they grow so fast. They're inflating with water. And I used to, when I was a child, I would grow them, and I'd go to school in the morning, and I'd come back after school, and it was a completely different stage of its growth. It was so much faster than plant growth. And so I think mushroom grow kits are a really great way to bring fungi into your life, and to be able to appreciate how astonishing they are. You get to appreciate a mushroom at every stage of its growth, rather than just, you know, say, buying it from a shop or picking it fully grown from a forest.
That's a good question.
So this is a serious question, but it's going to sound fundamentally unserious.
I love it.
With the popularity of the, I believe it's the HBO show, The Last of Us, as well as the video game that preceded it, there's been a lot of new attention drawn to essentially the, you could say virological, but essentially the disease-causing aspects of all, you know, items within the fungal kingdom. And I wanted to ask you, in your work, how do you approach the sort of risk factors here? How do you think about those? Do you talk about those at these kind of lectures that you give? Are you encouraging fungal awareness, not only, for instance, to promote like growing them at home, but also thinking about some of the more scary questions about, you know, what risks these might pose to our societies in the 21st century?
Great question.
Yeah, really, really important subject. Fungal diseases are a huge problem for humans, have always been. Every year, fungal diseases ruin a quantity of rice large enough to feed 60 million people. And that's just one example. Famines brought about by fungal diseases have transformed human civilizations through history. This is a really big deal. And fungal pathogens of humans, fungal diseases of humans are on the rise. And people are not giving this enough attention. Fungi haven't received enough attention in general, and in every department of fungal study, you see the same neglect. So what's, I think, most worrying about this neglect, one of the things that's most worrying is that within the realm of human disease, there's very, very little money given to research about fungal diseases. There's not a single vaccine that's been developed against fungal diseases. This is a big issue, and it's a big issue because we're creating the conditions for new fungal superbugs to arise by our over-application of fungicides, as we tend to do with these things. We overuse them. And also through climate change. And this is where it comes on to The Last of Us. The concept of The Last of Us is that the warming of the earth has created the conditions for a fungal pathogen to to live in human bodies. Our bodies are warm, you know, like most mammals. We have these warm bodies, which defends us from a lot of fungal diseases, because most fungi can't grow at that temperature. But the concept is that if the world is getting warmer, and if these fungi are adapting to that warmer temperature, then it'll be easier for them to make a leap into a human body. Now, this is something that's already being discussed by fungal ecologists and pathologists, not with regard to the cordyceps fungi the show is about, but with regard to other fungi. And it remains a very serious possibility that global heating could create the conditions for certain fungal pathogens to make an easier life in mammal bodies, including humans. So this is an area that should get a lot more attention than it does. I agree, and thanks for raising that issue.
That was a great question. Please give it up for Merlin Sheldrake, everybody.